It popped up and as a reminder, just in the nick of time. Okay, welcome everyone. For those I haven't met, my name is Eben Weitzman. I'm on the faculty at UMass Boston in the Department of Conflict Resolution, Human Security, and Global Governance, and I direct the graduate programs in conflict resolution here. Delighted to see you all joining us today, and very happy to be uh, able to join you all in celebrating the publication of this really exciting book. Um, we're joined today by quite a number of people. I think if I try to name everyone that's here, I will definitely miss a lot of people. So I'm not gonna try to get everyone. I know that this whole event is organized and made possible by our amazing departmental staff, our program managers Kelly Ward Mason and Lee Murphy, and our colleague Charlotte Namby do an amazing amount of work to organize events like this and get everything out and get the information out to people and get you all here. And like as we discussed earlier on, and there will be food later on when we're all back face to face in person. Thank you to our Dean David Cash and our colleague and associate Dean Kiki Adozi. I see many of my faculty colleagues here, and I know that there are faculty from some of our other speakers institutions here. I'm not going to try to name everybody. It won't work. Um, but thank you all for joining us. I'm really excited about today's event and about this book. As somebody who taught research methods for many years, starting probably around 1995 is when I started teaching research methods, and only haven't been for the last few years, which is no small coincidence, has to do with hiring Karen. Um, but it's something that I spent a lot of my life, professional life, trying to figure out how to do. And it's a lot of fun. There's a great intellectual challenge in it, and seeing this book and the approach that our guests today have taken to thinking through how to teach research methods has really been an exciting thing for me. So let me start by sort of telling you who we're joined by, and you should see our speakers right across the top of your screen. Um, our colleague Karen Ross is an assistant professor in our Department of Conflict Resolution, Human Security, and Global Governance. We're part of the McCormick Graduate School of Policy and Global Studies here at UMass Boston. Karen's research and teaching focus on issues at the intersection of dialogue, peace building, social activism, and education. She conducts basic and applied research to help understand the impact of grassroots peace building interventions and the way that those interventions fit into societal level peace building efforts. Karen's research also focuses on issues related to how we conduct research about peace building and social justice work, and how we can both do and teach social research methodology in more inclusive and democratic ways. Barbara Dennis studies methodological theory and concepts, specifically concepts like validity and ethics and their corresponding practices. She generally does this in the context of long participatory ethnographies oriented toward social justice. She's engaged in peace studies with Ugandan colleagues. Her work with U.S. Dreamers is described in a recently published book, Walking with Strangers, Critical Ethnography and Educational Promise, exploring the inner workings of ethnographic practices, and offers new concepts and ideas for engaging in social justice work with participants. She is a mother and grandmother and a Project Runway wannabe. um, Pei Wei Lee is an associate professor of counseling and psychology and the research coordinator for the PhD program of counseling and psychology in transformative leadership, education, and applied research at Lesley University. Pei Wei's cross-cultural experiences as an immigrant and a Chinese woman growing up in the late socialist, emerging capitalist era in China have fueled her interest in understanding the intersection of culture, class, race, gender, and complex power relations that fuel and reproduce social and systemic pathologies and psychological sufferings. Her scholarship is located in the borderland of critical psychology and critical qualitative methodologies pertaining to identity development, emancipatory interest, consciousness raising, recognition, solidarity, and potentials for liberatory actions. Substantively, she's engaged in research on diversity and social justice education, immigration and detention, violence against women, and spiritual development. And Pengfei Zhao is an assistant professor of qualitative methodology in the College of Education at the University of Florida. She's recently named the 2021 National Academy of Education and Spencer Foundation Postdoctoral Fellow. Pengfei has an interdisciplinary background in inquiry methodology, sociology, and cultural studies. In her theoretical and methodological work, she draws from a wide spectrum of theories, from critical theories to contemporary pragmatism, feminism, and post-colonial studies, to formulate a praxis in social justice-oriented qualitative research methodology. In her empirical work, she primarily uses ethnographic, narrative, and action research approaches to address issues of universal significance, such as disadvantaged youth's coming-of-age experience, student-centered teaching and learning, and sexuality education. Now, in qualitative research traditions, it's often very important, we feel, to make clear where the researcher is coming from, where the author is coming from, where they're positioned as a contextualizing factor in understanding their work, their research. So as you listen to those introductions, you begin to get a little bit of a sense, perhaps, of the context in which today's conversation will be going on. Having said all that, I think that when we're teaching research methods, when we're first learning research methods, when we're continuing to learn new research methods, we're always engaged in trying to understand, communicate different ways of engaging with the world, different ways of understanding the world. Figuring out how to teach that, how to engage students in learning about different ways of learning about and knowing the world is a really unique challenge, I think, in education and in learning. And I was really taken with the approach in this book, and no surprise to me, having had many conversations with Karen over the last several years about how she thinks about research. But this book really does formulate and present an opportunity for teachers and learners in different ways to think about engaging with learning about research methodology. I just want to read you a short little excerpt from chapter 1 that for me really framed very nicely what the book was about. And it's in a section about how to read the book. And here's what they wrote, our authors today. They said a typical research methods textbook usually starts with a definition of research and then a rather linear process of choosing a research question, deciding on a research design, collecting and analyzing data, and writing up research. Research is often portrayed as a type of specialized knowledge that stands on its own. Students are positioned to absorb such knowledge passively. And that's, I think, for most of us who have been through research methods training, we've just heard a fairly close description of the way we usually get introduced to it. In contrast, this text grounds the discussion of research in ordinary experiences and foregrounds your own understanding and feelings about research as informed by your experiences. We move away from a didactic view of knowledge that suggests knowledge exists external to your experience and who you are. Instead, we move toward the premise that learning and knowledge are interactional and relational, always forming and formed through intimate connections to your life experiences. And I was grabbed by that passage in that first chapter, both because it spoke so clearly to what I've experienced over my career in terms of the challenges of engaging students in understanding research as a different way of knowing the world and connecting it to their existing ways of knowing the world, and also because it spoke so well and so clearly to the ways in which I've heard Karen talking about and working with our students, and the way I've heard our students talk about the experience of learning from Karen. So I'm really excited to see this book coming out into the world. Delighted to welcome today's guests to talk about it, and I will turn things over to Karen.
All right, so thank you, Evan, for that wonderful introduction and that passage, and framing really our discussion today from that passage. I want to start, before I do anything else, and I apologize to Pengfei, Pei-Wei, and Barbara for not telling them in advance. Is something that occurred to me that I really, we really need to do, is just saying a lot of thank yous. So first of all, thank you everybody who's here. I recognize a lot of names in chat boxes or black boxes and many faces and some that I don't. So I'm really happy that you're all able to join us. But I have to say, I mean, you know, this textbook has been a project that's been in the works for a long time and has gotten a lot of support from a lot of places, certainly from the faculty and that I've had the luck to work with in our department, and also from the dean's office, who supported it over the years in material ways that have allowed, you know, the development of the textbook and its production. To all of our contributors to the textbook. So one of the things that we'll talk about in a little bit is how the textbook is structured. And I'll kind of preview that by saying that in many of our chapters, we have guest contributions from researchers at universities, many universities geographically dispersed. One from our very own colleague, Jeff Pugh, who is here. And I saw also Danielle Lansing's name in one of the Zoom boxes. So thank you both. And thank you all. If there's somebody who I didn't see, please let me know so I can thank you individually, but all of our guest contributors who have enriched this textbook in many ways and helped make it more of a dialogic endeavor along the lines of what we've hoped to do. Also to Alison Bakhta, who's here, one of the PhD students in our department, who read every single one of these chapters and provided us feedback from both a student and an educator lens to help us make sure that the language was accessible, that the concepts were clear, and who has definitely contributed to the textbook being much better than it probably would have been without your insights. So thank you so much to Allison. And finally, to all of our students. So we have had students who have read draft chapters and provided us feedback on those chapters unknowingly, and maybe explicitly and not explicitly. Some who've given us feedback on our writing, some who've given us feedback on the clarity of concepts. But over the last, I don't know, I guess at this point, 10 years, 12 years, for some of us more than that, right? All of the students who we have had in our research methodology classes, whose questions have challenged us to clarify concepts, whose insights have helped us to enrich our own understanding of the concepts that we discuss in the textbook. Really, there's no way this textbook would have happened without all of those questions to begin with. And certainly wouldn't look the way that it looks today without them. So thank you to every student who's here and all of our students who are not, and all of the students who have now gone on, some of whom probably to do some amazing research of their, I mean, I know some of them have done some amazing research, but also all the students who are doing amazing research that we don't know about. And Pei-Wei, Pengfei, Barbara, if I've missed any thank yous, please jump in and let me know, or add those in as well. And of course, also to just second Eben's comment earlier about all of the work that goes into these kinds of events, and as a whole, all of the support that Charlotte and Kelly and Lee have provided to me also in the last several years that have been part of making this textbook happen in various ways. So having said that, just a quick overview of what's going to happen today. I'm talking now, but this whole textbook, as you'll hear in a little bit, has been really a collaborative affair. And it was very clear to me that I should not be the person primarily talking here. So we've kind of thought about a couple of different aspects of the textbook process and product that we want to address. I'll give a little bit of context and history to the project and process that led to the production of the book. And then I think Barbara and Pengfei will talk a little bit about the structure of the book. And then because this has been such an important collaboration and relationship has been also such a really big part of this process.
For the coffee shop.
Sorry? So because the collaboration has been such a big part of this process, we want to spend really some time talking about that, and Pei Wei is going to frame a couple of opening points for discussion around that before we kind of open it up to a broader discussion. But it always goes without saying among the four of us, and I should say it goes without saying here for the group as well, that if there are questions or comments that you have all along the way, please don't feel that you have to leave them until the end. So we look forward to, hearing your thoughts on all of this as we go through the discussion today. And on that note, let me start by telling you a little bit of the history of how we got here. Pei Wei, Pengfei, and I were all graduate students together in the Inquiry Methodology program at Indiana University, where Barbara is a professor. And as part of our graduate studies, all three of us, and as Barbara as well, so all four of us were teaching a course that, for those of you who are in the conflict resolution program here, is similar in a lot of ways to the research methodology course. So introductory research methodology course for graduate students, primarily master's students, primarily students whose work is professionally oriented and whose degrees were professionally oriented. So not necessarily students who are immediately or at all planning on going on to a PhD. And one of the things that we kind of talked about in various ways was the fact that we were having a really hard time finding ways to make the material that we were teaching resonate with our students. So I have this memory of Pei Wei and I having this conversation at a conference where we were talking about how challenging we found this and how hard it seemed to be to teach this course in a way that our students could connect with. And that conversation became the basis for thinking about an action research project that the four of us undertook. So we were lucky enough to get actually two over time, but initially a grant from Indiana University's Scholarship of Teaching and Learning Center to conduct an action research process, essentially looking at the way our students conceptualized research, how they understood the process of research, how that understanding of research changed through the semester in which they were taking this research methodology course. And in an iterative way, along with it, we were also really focused in a very deliberative, systematic way on thinking through our own teaching approach to this course. So I just went back earlier today and was looking at some of our documents where we mapped out course objectives and pedagogical objectives at a course level and then at a week by week level. And then we're trying to find resources that could address the pedagogical objectives and the substantive content that we were looking at in each of these weeks. And we started working on this project. We gathered data from, I think it was close to 100 students in the course of a semester, I think in 2013, 2014 academic year, or maybe 2012, 2013. It's been a long time. I can't remember exactly when it started. And we were gathering that data and making these changes to our syllabi and to our course objectives and our approaches kind of at the same time. And we were also, as a result of the fact that we were doing this project together, we were all on one another's Blackboard sites. And so we saw also all of the messages that were going out from ourselves as instructors to our students, clarifying concepts, engaging with the material for the week. And at some point, one of us wrote a message to the other three and said, if we took all of these explanations that we're giving our students and we put all of this material together, we could write a book. And that kind of became the impetus for us to write this book. So that was back in 2013. And it took a while after that. I mean, we were working on dissertations, having children, getting married, moving to different universities. So it was, you know, it's been a long process, obviously. We're now in 2021. But in this context of trying to find appropriate material for our students, working to develop explanations and clarify concepts for our students, we decided at a certain point that we should write this textbook. And so, you know, we met in the summer of 2015 for the first of what ultimately became 7 writing retreats. And that first meeting, we started putting together a proposal for the textbook. We started mapping out some of the ideas that we had for how we might structure it, what the content would be, how we would approach it. And between then and the fall of 2020, we've spent a lot of time thinking together and thinking apart about the research process, about our own understandings of research, our own understandings of teaching research. We've written a couple of journal articles in the interim as well about collaborative data analysis, about our students' conceptualizations of research. We have probably 5 or 6 other articles that are hopefully in the works at some point based on discussions we've had around some of these concepts, but have really developed, I think, very kind of consensus-based approach to thinking about research methodology, and an approach that we've all learned a lot from just in engaging with one another as well as with our students. And here we are. So now this is the first semester where we've been able to use the actual text of the book, which I'm holding here, with our students. But as I said earlier, you know, our students have been reading drafts of these chapters for several years now and offering us feedback on both the substance and the writing. So I think it's been a collaborative process, not just between the 4 of us, but between everyone who's been involved in our classes and in the conversations that we've had with others at conferences, with other colleagues of ours, and so forth. I'm going to quickly share one slide here that I wanted to show you as a way of illustrating how we kind of came to this thinking about the need to bring our students into the process a little bit more. So you see this slide here, which is taken from a paper that we wrote and published a couple of years ago that draws on data that we analyzed of how our students were conceptualizing research at the beginning of taking this kind of course, right? An introductory social research methodology course. And it's a little bit simplified here, but essentially what we found in our analysis was that students conceptualized research in one of 4 ways. And you see that in each of the 4 boxes. That the way students came into a course, we asked them to write a little bit about how they defined research and how they came to that definition of research, so their background and so forth. And our analysis looked at both how they conceptualized research, but then how they position themselves in relation to it. And what we found really, and again, this is really a little bit oversimplified in how it's shown in the slide, but was that students saw research in a variety of ways, but in almost all of the different contexts where they were thinking about research, they saw themselves mostly as outside of the research process. And so a big part of this textbook has been trying to find ways to engage with the material so that rather than seeing themselves as outside of the research process in these different ways, that they see themselves as engaging in research and inquiry in their personal lives, in their professional lives, and in their academic lives. So I'm going to actually turn it over now to Barbara to talk a little bit more about how specifically we do that in our text. And Barbara, do you want me to just leave the slides up? You're muted still.
Yeah, that would be great, Karen. And could you go ahead and switch to the next slide? Thanks. Okay. Welcome, everybody. I'm so happy to be here with you and to share in this moment with Karen and her department. And I appreciate my colleagues and friends also who are here. Peng Fei and I are going to speak briefly on the structure of the book. The concept of structure has a complicated and contested history in social science philosophy. We understand structure to be implicit, explicit, and explicatable. We know that structure both resources and constrains our process, but it never fully determines what emerges. From our study with students, we became aware of a disjuncture between the typical canon of introductory graduate research texts and the conceptual structures our students were using to make sense of that canon and of what it meant, what it might mean for them to do research. We grappled with what it would mean to put learners at the center of the structure rather than as invisible onlookers to a canon that seemed to exclude them. What would this recentering look like? What would make it possible? What would it make possible? What would it bring into view? This slide illustrates what we came up with. So let's start by imagining the more familiar structures for introducing students to social research. Can you envision the research process as a structure for introducing students to social science? The structure would start with research questions and move through disseminating findings in a somewhat linear fashion. The structure is typically presented as if it exists prior to the researcher and is activated more or less adequately by researchers in the conduct of a study. Another common structure is the typological one, through which students are introduced to different types of research methods, often beginning with fixed categories of quantitative, qualitative, or mixed types. These common structures bring to the foreground a canonized body of knowledge which students are expected to navigate. Now, notice how our learner-centered approach contrasts with those more familiar ways of structuring an introductory text. Here, rather than foregrounding what would be learned, we really wanted to foreground how and why we learn, emphasizing that we're learning with one another. That is, our learning is relational and dialogic. We're collectively engaged through our experiences, our reflections, praxis, and dialogues toward the purposes of emancipatory possibilities and socio-political effects. We tried to emanate these characteristics throughout the book, keeping them in mind as we wrote and as we made substantive and stylistic decisions. But most importantly, this was not just a structure for writing the book. It was our reconstruction of the ideas we have about the implicit structure of social science and about our work together as researchers and as teachers. Most importantly, it was a structure that engages with learners, with researchers, with participants, centering them and bringing them into the knowledge making directly. Okay, on the next slide, yeah, Karen, thank you. You see how this was manifested into an organic vision. Very early on, we decided to organize the book through dialogues on foundations as a starting place. Now, I know there's a strong anti-foundation argument going on in the social science philosophy circles. Those largely relate to a conception of foundations as truth with a capital T, set in stone, unmalleable, clusters of claims which stand as unquestionable givens. However, we draw on and engage with foundations that are by their nature contextual, open to query, considered criticizable, and are amenable to transformation. So from these dialogic and relational assumptions, we engage with learners in conversations on key orienting ideas in social research. This first cluster looks very different from other texts in the field. We explicitly dialogue with readers about epistemology, identity, truth, ethics, meaning, socio-political conditions, and validity. We put these ideas into conversation not as definitions or constructs to be memorized, but as ideas to be examined and thought about, applied, and evaluated. Clusters 2 and 3 orient toward data and inference, respectively. In these clusters, we bring out ideas that were more implicit in the first cluster. For example, we make more explicit connections between identity and decisions about how to generate data. The structure of these two clusters both resists and critiques imposed distinctions between knower and knowledge, quantitative and qualitative research, process and outcome, and so on. While these distinctions are relevant to engaging with social science, they are neither primary nor static for us. The next slide is a photo of a drawing we produced through our conversations on that first writing retreat that Karen referred to. You can see in this drawing several features. For example, there are puzzle pieces kind of at the top and the bottom. There are these squares that sit at nexuses. There are varying colors that indicate distinct threads woven together in a shape that resembles a helix. The drawing reflects our early thinking about how chapters might flow into the overall construction of a text. You can see at this point, we were already naming the clusters. We had an idea of the threads, that these are the elements like ethics and validity and identity. We envisioned the points of nexus as conceptual interludes, and we traced the pieces of the puzzle throughout to suggest the idea that doing inquiry resembled an organic puzzle. Now you'll notice in this that there are some aspects which might be familiar in introductory research texts like validity, and others that you rarely see like identity. Now our colleague Peng Fei will talk about how the structure played out through the chapters.
Thank you, Barbara. Thank you, Karen, and thank you everyone for being here with us. And this is Peng Fei. I'm just super excited to be here to share with you all our stories and our journey that came to fruition in this book. And I have to say that I haven't really made such a good preparation to systematically introduce you to the book. If I'm speaking in complete sentences, that's me being super excited. So here, this is a picture from one of our writing retreats. I guess this is, if my memory is correct, this is probably maybe in the middle of our writing. It's like in one of the beautiful, the most beautiful places that I have ever been, Cape Cod, Worcester. I don't know, Karen, can I just say where it is? Is that okay? Okay, so this is Karen's parents' summer house, and they generously allowed us to stay there for our writing retreat. And this is their sunroom. I guess we have all of these, like we create all of these, bullet points, items, and thoughts, and we put them all together. We stick it to the glass windows and try to organize our thoughts. And here you could see some of the keywords. On the one hand is power, and in the middle is identity, positionality, and then validity. Those are some of the key concepts that underline our writing. So that is to say, in chapter 1, in cluster 1, we have one chapter that is specifically designated for power, and one chapter specifically we talk about identity development, and one chapter about validity. But that is not the only place where we talk about these terms. The terms are really like run through the entire textbook. And there are places where we make this explicit and extensive discussion about it. And there are also places where we make connections, where we talk about, how we understand validity in the process of inference making, or how we understand validity in the process of constructing our data. And there are places we implicitly tap into the concept of, say, power structure. Is always there when we consider, either writing or presenting our work, or interacting with our participants. So this just to give you, a glimpse of the process of writing the book. And I believe later Pei probably will lead us to talk more about this, because really, I mean, I really enjoy the product of the book, but the entire process, I think I've learned and grown so much from it. Karen, can you move to the next slide? So this is where you see the chapter structure. That is to say, the generally speaking, each of the chapters, perhaps except for the introduction and the epilogue, follow this structure. We started with this idea of musing up on every day. And then we move to the narrative and conceptual interludes. In between the different sections, we have the pause and reflect, and then we present a research scenario. We talk about the key concepts, and then we explicitly make the connections between you and research, like you as the readers or the students, and then the synthesis. So I just want to, as you look at this visual representation of the chapter structure, I just want to highlight some, unique features of the book. One of the things is that we start every chapter with this idea of musing up on every day. And that is not because we want to, we simply want to start with something, our students are familiar with. We do want to ground their our discussion in their everyday experience, but more importantly, it's about how we see the validity of research. Like we conceptualize the idea of validity in our everyday communication, in our how we understand and how we communicate with each other. So so if you, I mean, I have heard many students and colleagues told me that they found the book very readable, like very accessible, and especially they love the feature of starting with these everyday scenarios. And I felt like one thing for sure, we want to make it accessible, but also it's important to point out the more like underlying connection between why we choose this as the starting point of each of the chapter, and how we conceive some of the key terms and concepts, how we conceptualize our approach here. And from musing upon every day, we move to the narrative and conceptual interludes, where we weave together, sometimes some of the research-specific terminologies or our discussion of the approaches. And sometimes we use narratives and examples to illustrate those approaches. And research scenario, which is more about, we indeed include a wide variety of empirical research examples in this textbook, in the sense that so our readers could make the explicit link between, on the one hand, these almost like feel like abstract terms, and on the other hand, there are these very concrete, very situated, and localized research scenarios. How to make this connection? Well, through my teaching and through my own work, I found that's probably the most challenging part, and we don't want to miss that part. And I think the other thing is about you and the research, where we explicitly discuss how our readers and how our students can relate themselves with the content of the chapter. In our teaching scenarios, like in our different teaching settings, we have students of different life paths. We have students with very different professional aspirations. So we talk about no matter who you would like to be, whether you would like to be a professional practitioner or whether you would like to be a researcher, there are ways for you to connect with the research, with inquiry in general. And that is the part where I feel like our student-centered approach really, got highlighted in the chapter structure. I'm going to end the slide for dinner. I will just stop here, and Pei will guide us through some discussions. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Pengfei. Again, thank you everyone for being here and for this moment, and for my colleagues and friends who can make it today to join the celebration. I think the best part of this project is the collaboration for me. So I'm gonna hopefully create some space for us to have a conversation and amongst all of us, and maybe hopefully others be chiming as well about the process, because it's really weird. I remember when I first got a book arrived in mail, I held it was it's really weird feelings, like this is a book, but I'm thinking like in my memory of this 7+ years that experiences is a lot of dialogue and conversation, and it's some kind of a being level experiences, and it cannot be only reduced to a text, but we're really happy to have that in hand as well. So as Karen said earlier, our collaboration started, I still remember that scene, Karen, like 2013, Urbana-Champaign in an Indian restaurant. We're sitting there with our curries, and we're just talking. And that since then, and we have collaborated, for all of us, like more than 7 years, and through our friendship and our intellectual and lived sisterhood as well. And those things have started even before our collaboration. We work on a lot of writings, different things that Karen mentioned, and but we also have that seven writing retreats in Connecticut, Massachusetts, Indiana, and Tennessee, and virtual retreats through Skype. Thinking about those moments, I'm just thinking, wow, what a privilege for us to be able to pause in our life and bye-bye to those babies and whatever, and just like for all of us to talk about ideas. And I don't think it's such a, I think our job in a way is such a privilege, and to be able to just think and talk and creating new ideas collectively. And not a lot of people can do that. And so also want to acknowledge that. And along the way, a lot of life changes took place, Karen mentioned, and Karen, Pengfei, and I acquire our first academic position, adjusting our role from grad students to faculty members, and still feel like, wow, I still feel as a grad student sometimes, and I would love to be, actually like to be grad students. And we move from places to places, and but we're always connected. At the time, Skype. We don't have Zoom. It's our Skype meetings. I remember. There are also mention about babies and grandbabies and born and growing up as we're making progress year by year. So our measure is every year by year, not like a month by month. It's a long process, and so this collaboration certainly has been a journey. I don't feel like it's just academic endeavor, but friendship, sisterhood, and intricate connection to our larger life world. And is foremost a relational process and a dynamic and balancing act of finding ways to care for each other's needs, what's going on in each other's life at the time, and attending to fissures, voices, and various power dynamic that emerge along the way. And I just really appreciate that space we hold to be able to examine those things. So to make the discussion on collaboration, I think need to be collaborative and multivocal. So I just would like to invite 3 of you, and first of all, and to maybe reflect together on a couple of questions or prompts. The first one, I wonder, how have you experienced our collaboration? What are some moments of roses and thorns during the collaboration?
Go ahead, Barbara. It seemed like you were about ready to say something.
Yeah, but we haven't heard your voice in a while, Karen, so I'd love it if you went first.
Okay, so I think that just exemplifies the rose, right? So I mean, one of the things about this collaboration that's really been has meant so much to me is how it's the process, and it connects to the product as well, that everything that we're trying to impart in our textbook around dialogue, around research as relational, around context, around kind of lived experiences has been reflected in the way we've interacted with one another over the last, and it's, you know, I mean, we've known each other now for a while, but the collaboration has been going on for 8 or 9 years, right? So, and I've really appreciated both at a personal and intellectual level how much I've grown through all of our interactions. And I have to admit, I don't know if I've ever said this to you before, but I feel really intimidated sometimes when I'm in a room with the three of you, because the way that, you know, I hear ideas being expressed kind of makes me think sometimes, oh, wait, there's like a level of ability to theorize and understand and analyze and conceptualize that I think I'm not quite in the same league with. But I think one of the things that I've appreciated the most throughout this whole process is that we've each brought different lenses and different understandings to all of it in a way that has certainly for me individually led to a tremendous amount of growth, certainly in my thinking about these topics, but also in thinking about, you know, life in general. I mean, it's not every day that I have the opportunity to interact with such an amazing group of women who I care about so much, and to think about your experiences in relation to mine. So, you know, I don't know if I can express how much I appreciate that as something that's been part of, and I don't know if it's possible to ever, like, you know, pick up this book as somebody who isn't part of this process and see it reflected in the pages, but I hope it's there somehow, because I think it's really been kind of from the inside out core part of it. The thorn, you know, Pei Wei, you asked about roses and thorns. I don't, it's hard for me to think of thorns, really. One of the things that I think about a lot is a moment early on in the process where, and I actually don't think about it that much, but from the perspective of thorns, a moment early in the process where I think I had left Indiana and the three of you were still in Bloomington. And I remember sending a message and feeling like there was something that I was missing something because I wasn't physically present and in our discussions. And I say it in the context of thorns because I remember feeling that way, but I also, that when I expressed that in the conversation that came out of that, I think was also for me a real turning point in thinking about this collaboration as based on a set of relationships, and the relationships being foundational and primary, and the rest kind of emerging out of that. So I'll leave it at that. I think I don't think there's any way for me to actually express in words like the strength of how much this collaboration means to me, both personally and academically.
Maybe I can go next. I think for me, it's very interesting because when we were working on the book, all four of us, I feel like we were at very different stages of, you know, our life and personal life and our professional development stages. And we started at the time, I think Karen has already moved to a different place, started some adjuncting or visiting position. No,
I was just moved back to live with my spouse when I was done with coursework.
Oh, okay. Yeah. but you were the first person graduated from school of education. And then Pei Wei moved away for internship and graduation. So I was the last person who left Bloomington, Indiana. And that was like for me, it was a few years that was really challenging and in many ways, because like I was in this constant move sort of mode. Like I was either living with my spouse or doing some adjuncting or going for like looking for jobs or like settling down in a very new institution, in a very new place. There were like, I just don't see there are that many challenges in writing the book, but in other aspects of my life, it's like I feel like there were 2 or 3 years when we were intensively working on the book. I feel like that were the years that I would either make it or I would just be leaving academia all at once. So the collaboration among us meant a lot to me, in the sense that it has taught me so many things, and it has supported me to go through these very, very challenging years, and it has taught me to be resilient and persistent. And I don't know who I would have been without this collaboration with all three of you. So that's like, I don't know, it feels like a little bit astounding to think about those challenges, but the collaboration part is really what that have turned those challenges into something I wouldn't say beneficial, but I would say something like to overcome those and to strengths maybe. Yeah.
Barbara, you want to chime in?
Sure. So I guess I'll just share a couple of additional things. I think everything that has been said, I know we can all resonate with, because we've all had pieces of those experiences and they've really been shared. One of the things I have really loved is sitting in a space. It happens more when we're together physically than when we're working over Zoom. So I'm going to refer to those writing retreats, but we'll be sitting in a space and we just start thinking aloud together. And we end up in a place none of us began at. And we are all thinking new together. And that wonderful sort of experience of, it's not like producing sentences you already have in your head. It's like the inspiring moments where new ideas are coming together and you realize that maybe you would have had that idea eventually if you were sitting in your own chair in your own study someplace. But it really came up in a unique way through the conversations with these, with all of us together, all four of us together. And those moments were so exciting. And we would have these breakthrough moments. And sometimes they were moments where just, like I remember one time we were at the retreat in Indy and Pei Wei couldn't join us. Her daughter was ill, and so we were Skyping her in, and Karen and I were sitting on the floor, and we just kind of had this epiphany about this concept we've worked with for a long time, thematizing. But it was like this way of thinking about the relationship between clusters, and it was so exciting to have that idea and then share it with Peng Fei and Pei Wei and have this kind of zeitgeist about, oh, that's really great, that really works. And then I think in terms of thorns that, the collaboration is easy on a lot of levels. I've been in collaborations that aren't so easy. So I think I just want to say that. But in terms of thorns, you don't work this long and this hard and this close with people without sometimes hurting people's feelings, without having to learn hard lessons. And I remember one of the things, so I always think of these thorns as also gifts. And I remember at one writing retreat, I used some ableist language, and Karen pointed it out to me. And I thought, how beautiful to be working with someone who cares enough about who I am in the world and who I want to be in the world to help me use language that better aligns with my own values. And so moments like that are hard, but really important and really good. And those are the kind of moments I share with my colleagues. And I really appreciate that very much about the group.
Thanks, Barbara. Very much resonate with what people have been said. One thing that I want to add on to is I often feel like academic culture at large, it's a system itself, and it operates on an extractive kind of logic and numbers, productivities, and product citation index, and all those things that we cannot get away from because we're part of that embedded in the system. And however, I feel like our collaboration allow that space for when we are working together, and my primary thinking is not that textbook, actually, like producing a textbook, but it's more about how we come together, how idea stimulate each other, and we create new idea, and how we take responsibility, and in an equitable way, not equal, not always equal, but equitable, because there are different things happening in our life. We need to attend to that. And so I always feel like people will step in, and we have that awareness of that sphere. It's a collective sphere where things are needed, who need to step up, and who need to be cared for. So I think that's always, as this Pengfei said, I think academic life is not easy. It just there is an alienating, objectifying energy that happening at the same time, kind of counter those relational form of energy. So having that space, I can kind of fall into, and it's almost like remind me, as Zen master said, good for nothing. It's intrinsically kind of good. I there's something good. I feel I'm growing. I feel like I'm expanding myself, and collectively, and we're creating something that's great, and I feel good about. At the same time, it's not necessarily for some external goals, external something I have to achieve. So that is really valuable. And I also remember there's moments of talking about power, and in terms of authorship, we always have a ongoing and dynamic conversation about that. And that also shifting time is really kind of in the moment when we decide on, when we're asked, we have to turn in some authorship. We're looking at whose life right now, professional development, and since our collaboration is very equal, who will benefit most? And in the moment to work with a system that is based on those rules and etc. recognition. So I think these things are just have implicit consensus of how we work with each other. And that is something I don't always feel in other collaboration or in academy in general. So that's something really stood out to me. Yeah. Other things you would like to add? I have another question.
Maybe ask the other question. I also am just looking at the time, and it's already after 4. I want to make sure that in the spirit of collaboration, that this conversation can also include others who might have comments or questions. I see there's things that are going through the chat, but maybe create some space for other voices as well.
Absolutely. Let's do that. Let's open it up. And because next question is everybody can chime in, and it doesn't have to be. What I have is like how we imagine academic collaboration that centers on care and relationality. And so the space is open to anybody. It doesn't have to be responding to this prompt, but whatever you would like to ask and share and join in, feel free to come in. And if you raise your hand, maybe is the easiest way to do that. There's a reaction button at the bottom on the right bottom, and there's a raise hand, so we can kind of keep track because I don't see everybody on the same screen. Yeah, Rita. Rita Kiki.
Thank you. Thank you all. I want to commend all of you, Karen and Pei Wei and Peng Fei and Barbara Dennis. It looks like it's going to be a wonderful book. I haven't got my copy yet, but I'm looking forward to getting it and really sharing the knowledge and hopefully using it. I don't have a question per se, but I just feel like I want to use your model to collaborate, this really fascinating conversation. And I want to just, sort of engage what's on my mind as I listen to the four of you talk about this fascinating experience in collaborating to yield this really, I think it's going to be a fascinating book. And so what's on my mind is when I first came to, the validity of this kind of research genre. I've called it, you've called it social research. I used to call it sort of participatory research where, I came to it through critical race theory. And, just remembering as you were speaking, reading Derek Bell's, book, where he just sort of convinced me and persuaded me for the first time in my life how, voice, and testimony was a valid form of knowledge. I was sort of used to quantitative, evidence building, being trained as a political scientist. But his book, in terms of, showing many of the things that you're speaking to, identity, validity, voice, as, forms of valid evidence. So I was fascinated, and your talk, reminded me of my fascination, but it also reminded me that I'm still a political geek, and I'm reminded that two states in the U.S. Today have banned critical race theory from their, from just amazing. And so I'm just wondering, how all of you are thinking about this genre of research and knowledge acquisition, at a time, in America today where it should be really, much more advanced, but instead it's being, suppressed.
Thanks for the question, Kiki. I wonder, my friends who wanted to respond first.
Karen, you gonna
Go ahead, Barbara.
Great minds. Yeah, I think, to not presume to have answers to that big question, I think that the idea is that definitely we tried to orient the book toward a social responsibility. So regardless of what kind of research you do, regardless of the kinds of questions that you ask, to realize that that research, with or without you, has a social context and a social responsibility. And that as we move through the world as people, so thinking about our ethics, for example, thinking about what it means to be an ethical researcher is not disconnected from thinking about yourself as being an ethical person in the world. And how do we stake ourselves and our research in these, political traumas, the tragedies that are going on now, and not take the sort of idea that our research work lands neutrally on some kind of equal playing field where knowledge isn't already riddled with inequities and racism and classism and ableism and sexism, and instead recognize that that is both problematic on the front end. So in the questions that we ask, we can't assume we're free of racism and sexism and classism as scholars. Our knowledge is heavily laden with a history, problematic history. And also we can't assume that we're putting work out in a world that is also not problematic. So I think that the idea is no matter what kind of research you're doing, quantitative, qualitative, mixed approaches, variety of designs within those orientations, that part of being a social researcher is to be able to locate who you are in that context as a researcher. And that's one of the things I think that really pulling that learner-centered orientation forward really gives us, because a lot of the students that we have, they want to make a difference in the world. And when they're not connecting with research, it's because they think somehow research isn't practical, that research isn't somehow having some impact or effect on that world they care about. I'll stop so Karen can jump in.
Well, I mean, I think the other thing I just wanted to add to it is kind of just, following from what you were just saying, Barbara, about bringing the learner-centered part forward in this text, is that, Kiki, you were talking about voice. And so certainly, among the four of us, we engage in participatory research, and we're thinking a lot, along with some of our other colleagues, about how to engage in research in ways that amplifies voices that aren't traditionally heard or heard as loudly. But that also is the voices of students who are and our readers, right, who are engaging in, and all of my students who are here, you've heard me say this, right? Like, research isn't just this thing that you're doing in class, or this textbook that you're reading, or this, the articles you're looking for to write your final paper. It's also all those things that you're doing, or connected to all these things that you're doing in your personal lives and in your professional lives outside of academia. And so that's, in a sense, I mean, we're thinking about voice, right? I mean, it's also reconceptualizing in a way what it means to be engaging in research, and thus who is engaging in research in a way that also, I think, is very much in line with our, our own values in our work outside of the textbook, and in the kind of substantive research that we're all doing, but was very much a focal point of the text itself.
Yeah, just one thing to add, Kiki, to your question. I'm trying to think, the what you brought up is this relationship between power and knowledge, right? Who has the power to produce, and whose voice history recorded, and for whose benefit. And I feel like part of the class and the text we're hoping for is that criticality. And in my experiences, and I think in our shared experiences too, when we get students to reflect, to ask questions about those assumptions, and who is producer, and how power and knowledge relationship, it almost feel like it's epiphany for some of them to start, oh, actually, I do need to look at that. And that translating into what's happening in the world, what about the news, and what about the political situation. So I see kind of student making connection once they are able to almost give themselves permission to say, I'm important in this. I also engage in this knowledge, whatever I do is a knowledge production process, and let's look at power. So I see that so important to in all our research methods class. That's what I'm thinking. Other question, comments?
I can make a comment. I have to leave to another meeting, but I really appreciate being part of this book and also making a contribution based on the work that we did with Dr. Dennis at our tribal college. And I think that oftentimes as we look at research endeavors within our community, you know, I kind of cringe in terms of a couple of things. One, the motivation of many of our tribal college students is to make a difference. And in order for them to see the possibilities of their futures being researchers, I think that we have to honor that many of them want to remain practitioners, just like myself. And so I really like that this speaks to that. And this also opens accessibility to include them in community-based participatory research. And so I really appreciate that lens, and then the validity of our positionality as still being very embedded within the community. So I really appreciate that, and I really applaud, you know, creating the space for those voices. And I think moving forward, that's going to be more and more relevant, and also from a critical lens, that's going to make things more inclusive and help to create identities for many of our students who feel so far removed from research, or who don't maybe want to use some of those terms because of the lived history of research within many of our Native communities. But I appreciate this, and I can't wait to read the whole book. So thank you for the opportunity.
And thank you, Danielle. I mean, this is actually for Danielle, I mentioned earlier, is one of our research scenario guest contributors. And again, silver lining of the pandemic, this is the first time we've actually met. So all of our interactions, although I know you and Barbara have a relationship, but all of our interactions have been purely over email up until this point. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Well, I'll just offer a comment. I don't think I can turn it into a question, but maybe you'll have some reactions to it. And I think you spoke to this a little bit, but one of the things that really came through in listening to you all talk about the book was the way in which your method in producing the book very much reflects the values that you brought to it and the presentation of how to do work that the book teaches or offers to students. The engagement between, you start out with Barbara as the faculty member and the other three of you as the students in the program, and you very much become colleagues and engaging in this process, that you're thinking through and struggling through the ideas and how to produce them in ways that seem to show up in the text. Right, so there seems to be this relationship between your method and what you produced, which is also what seems to be a really important part of what you're teaching in the book about how one does work, about how one produces knowledge. So I just that the seamless integration, it seems to me, of between the method that you used to produce a book about method is just wonderful, right? It's woven all the way through.
Thanks so much, Eben. And recently we wrote another book chapter on the praxis. I think what you describe is something we want to strive for, that value and what we do, writing and otherwise, and how to embody that. And, you know, we always fall short, and then try to returning to that that connection of value and practice. Yeah, thank you. Stacy?
I just so I have the book and have read just some bits so far, but I just want to say to everybody who has not seen the book yet on the call that the first thing I noticed is that it's just so much more inviting. Like I kept thinking as I was reading some of the texts, like welcoming me into this, area of inquiry and this way of seeing research, that it felt like almost in another planet. I kept thinking of some of the things I read as a graduate student about social science methods and how painful they were as an experience for me. I mean, I just hated some of them, right? So I just want to say the writing style, the tone, like the way you bring in, I love, for example, that there are a whole bunch of instances in which there is a word like reflection, that would simply be said in most methods books, as though we're all supposed to know exactly what it means, and we all have such a consensus definition that it doesn't bear mentioning. And you pause and talk about what you mean by it. And so I love the way it's framed. I love the tone, and I'm looking forward to having more time for other pieces of it.
Thanks.
Thank you so much, Stacy. And just kind of as Pei Wei and Peng Fei and Barbara, please chime in, but I just wanted to say, kind of in response to both Stacy, what you just said, and to Eben's comment, that, I mean, it's so validating to hear this, because this is, really like a very, Eben, I think you said what a seamless integration, but I don't feel like it was always seamless. I mean, there were many, many conversations about how do we do this and how do we write this. And, we had this whole set of conversations around like using gender neutral language in the text, and then going through and like triple checking for everything to make sure that we're doing that. So I'm glad that it comes across as seamless, first of all, but also it's really validating to hear that as readers of this text, that is what you're taking from it. And I think that's, that makes me feel like we're getting where we wanted to get with this text, and really what we wanted to do that was different from what we were seeing in the resources that we had read ourselves as graduate students, or that we were trying to find for our own students as we were teaching them. And, I think, as Pei Wei said too, it's something that we aspire to when we teach too, right? So when we're interacting directly with students, and not just in the context of our writing for students, but it's, it's always aspirational, and it's great to hear that it's coming across that way as well. Evan, I saw that you put your hand back up for a second.
Well, I was just struck as you were saying that, Karen, that what you've done around research methods very much mirrors what I think we have as a shared commitment to the way we go about the other side of our work, the conflict resolution, dialogue, promotion, peace building work, right? That the way in which we go about that work, the way in which we approach our collaborations in our facilitation teams, and so on, must mirror what we're trying to support the development of and the people that we're working with, right? So that the collaboration within the team must reflect what we're trying to help support in the folks that we're working with. And so you've mirrored exactly that same set of values, it seems to me, in the production of the methods text.
Yeah, I don't think I could do it in another way. I mean, just sort of, I think for all of us, so much embodied in how we approach, I think, all of the work that we do. As certainly everything that I've seen of the work of, Peng Fei and Pei Wei and Barbara's work in other contexts as well.
And I think one thing I could add, it's also a response to Eben's comments, and in the chat we have like Jeffrey talking about, oh, Stacy talks about how inviting he feels about the book, and then in the chat box, Jeffrey mentioned the wide range of contributors we have included in the book. So this really makes me think about, by inviting, we want to be inviting for our readers. We also want to invite, like offer the space for other authors to chime in, like from, different positions, from different, working with different theoretical traditions. And this goes back to Kiki's point about, critical race theory has been sort of like banned by some of the recent move in some of the states, and that's like, it's not always easy to do critical work. It's challenging in this period, in this time. I mean, you thought it shouldn't have been that way. When I was an international student, when I was doing my research grad studies in China, I thought I could have an easier, way to do this in the US. I mean, then I came to the United States, and I feel like, yes, maybe to some degree, but I was seeing some similar challenges. And in that sense, I think, like, I can safely to talk about this on behalf of all of us. It's like on behalf of Pei Wei and Karen and Barbara, like we are being very intentional in offering this space for, people, scholars, and students to think with us, to write with us from different critical perspectives.
I see that we're almost at 4:30, so I want to just take a moment to see if there are any other comments or questions in the last couple of minutes. One thing I'm going to actually, take advantage of the fact that I'm here at the top of the screen and just add one quick thing to what Peng Fei was just saying, which is, I think one of the things that we also spent quite a bit of time thinking about and are very explicit about in the text is that we are coming from a particular perspective and we know it, but we're very explicit in the text that we also don't want that to be and imposing that approach on everybody who reads it, that it's also part of the dialogue and part of the discussions about methodology and research and all of the issues and topics that we address, that we're inviting our readers to understand where we're coming from with it and also raise questions and challenge it. And so we're I don't know how well that comes across to readers, but certainly it's something that we're trying to model in this text as well. So I'm going to ask Barbara and Peng Fei and Pei Wei if you have any last comments that you want to make before we wrap up, or as we wrap up.
One thought I have is the book is lived and it's live. So I think it's not a product to me. It is kind of going to continue to live, and it will be revised, reflected on, further developed. So for that, I feel excited because it'll just continue to live, and we'll have more dialogue, more conversation. And I'm excited to always engage with other people who are interested in teaching research methodology, because I think Evan, you said earlier, to some it may appear as it's dull and such, but it's so interesting because it's everything. So yeah, and I'm excited. Yeah.
I want to say something that's about the collaboration and not about the book, though I love the book and I hope you get a chance to look at it. Not long ago, I heard somebody say that you can't write with friends. And I just want to say that I've never written with a better group than this close group of friends. And I think, you know, that don't, I guess what I want to say is like, take the potential for collaboration really seriously. And this was a door that we all walked through. We liked each other, but, you know, we didn't know could we do it? What it was going to involve, what it was going to ask of us, how different we would be at the end. And some people are afraid to risk friendships, or they're afraid that the friendship will get in the way of the product or whatever. And I guess one of the things I just want to say is that, you know, it's really worth it. And you can collaborate with people you love. And so I just want people to feel encouraged about that.
I second what you said, Barbara. I'm just so proud of like the collaboration, most importantly, I feel like. And I feel so fortunate to be with all of you here and to be able to walk this journey with Karen, Peve, and Barbara.
Well, I don't think there's really much more that I could say after that, except that I agree with every word that was said. And again, just want to say thank you to everybody who was here this afternoon, to all of the students over the past however many years it's been now, whose contributions to classes have been and are a part of the textbook. So I hope you all see yourselves in it, if and when you have a chance to read it. And most of all, to Pei, Pengfei, and Barbara for sharing their time with me here. And I'll end by just saying that I'm, in addition to looking forward to the event that includes the food, the amazing food that Kelly orders, and potentially a toast, I'm really looking forward to the chance, the next chance the four of us get to celebrate our book together in person. It's been a really long time now, just as it has for everyone else with COVID. Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you all so much. And I feel like our faculty just expanded. We've been benefiting for quite a number of years now from Karen's teaching, and I feel like our faculty just grew as we bring the rest of you into the teaching that's gone on in the department. And really, it's wonderful. Thank you.
And thank you for organizing this wonderful event. We all feel your love for Karen, and we feel so happy for her.
Yes, I do teach in a really wonderful department.
I feel the love from the department. Yeah. You, Evan, and Kelly, and others who organized this and behind the scenes, and I appreciate it.
Great. Yes. Okay. And thanks again to organizing is Kelly. Huge thanks for that.
Thank you, Kelly. As always, thank you, Kelly.
You're so welcome. Congratulations.